Begin, I wish to acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. My name is Christy Ashby, and I'm a professor in the School of Education and the director of the Center on Disability and Inclusion. I'm also the proud parent of 2 Syracuse City School District graduates. Go Bulldogs. On behalf of the CDI and the School of Education, I would like to welcome you to this afternoon's Town Hall event. The vision and purview of the CDI is broad, with the goal of promoting inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of school and society. And while we consider issues of disability across the lifespan, we see a core commitment of our work to improving access, opportunity, and outcomes for students with disabilities in all levels of schooling. That work happens here on our SU campus through our Inclusive U post-secondary program, in our teacher and leader preparation programs, and in the larger community through our NYSED-funded systems change initiatives, our partnerships with local organizations and school districts, and through our research. And it is in the spirit of these wide-ranging collaborations that we envisioned this afternoon's event. We wish to bring together stakeholders from across the region and across the state that share our commitment to advancing educational equity and excellence for all students. The educational challenges that we face in Central New York require multifaceted solutions and a willingness to reach across disciplinary and institutional boundaries. We are so pleased to have all of you here to join in this conversation. Before we move on with the program, we would like to thank the Institute for Veterans and Military Families for hosting us today and allowing us to use this beautiful space. And now I would like to invite Mike Haney, Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation and Barnes Professor of Entrepreneurship, to offer his welcome.
It got really bright in here all of a sudden. So thanks, Christy. On behalf of Syracuse University, let me welcome all of you to the KG Town Auditorium in the Daniel and Gail Daniello building, which is home to Syracuse University's National Veterans Resource Center. I'd like to extend a special welcome to our New York State legislative delegation who's with us today, and many community leaders who have joined us for this very important conversation. You know, Syracuse University is an institution with a deep and long-standing commitment to access and inclusion for all, and really a rich and influential history in disability studies and advocacy. And I will tell you, in fact, the origin story of the building that we're in today and the many programs that are operated from this building actually have their foundation in a program launched at Syracuse University called the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities. At the height of our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, just over 30% of everyone who served in a uniform during that time transitioned to civilian life with a disability that stemmed from their military service. And in response, and with the help of some folks who were in this very room, in 2007, we founded the Entrepreneurship Boot Camp for Veterans with Disabilities as a means to empower post 9/11 veterans with disabilities through business ownership. And what started from some very humble beginnings, last year we marked the 15th anniversary of that program that we still run today. And over that time, we have provided business ownership training to more than 2,300 veterans with disabilities, along with spouses and caregivers. And, you know, the university's commitment to inclusion also extends to this physical space that we're gathered in today. I would encourage all of you, if you have time, to walk throughout this building, which was purposefully designed and built to be the most accessible facility on the campus of Syracuse University, and arguably one of the most accessible in New York State. And true to that vision, today the NVRC serves as a collaborative space to nurture academic research, actionable programming, and as a forum to facilitate collaborative thought leadership for the purpose of advancing, in our case, the social, economic, wellness concerns of the nation's veterans and their families, to include the 4.9 million veterans living in the United States today with a disability connected to their service. You know, we're fortunate and pleased for the opportunity to bring together stakeholders and change makers like all of you committed to this work and to facilitate this important conversation. to advance opportunity for students, educational opportunity for students with disabilities. So thank you very much. I look forward to the great conversation. And again, welcome to the NVRC.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Haney. And I want to extend a special thank you to all the students, families, and educators that contributed to the testimonial video we'll soon share. And I want to add my thanks to the esteemed panelists, legislators, and honored guests from the local community and across the state that have joined us today. In particular, we want to recognize Senator Rachel May, Senator John Mannion, Assemblyman Al Sturpey, who you'll hear from in a moment, Chief Disability Officer Kimberly Hill Ridley, and Assistant Commissioner for NYSED, Chris Soriano. They're going to be part of our panel this afternoon. If I've missed any other distinguished guests or elected officials, please, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your attendance. A couple of housekeeping items. Obviously, we have ASL and CART, so please, I hope that that is helpful to all of you. Restrooms are located out and down the hallway, and there are emergency exits located around the building. So just to get a sense of who's in the space, because this is a town hall event. This is not us lecturing at you. We want a chance to engage with you. By show of hands, who in the room is a student or a recent graduate from any level of schooling? All right, thank you. Any parents in the room? Teachers? Paraprofessionals? Oh, awesome. Administrators? Folks here from community agencies or nonprofits. Wonderful. Members of the any of the university communities, either Syracuse or Lemoyne or OCC or Oswego or Cortland. I could keep going. Oh, wow. Thank you all for being here. Government officials. School board members. Thank you. Now, I probably missed somebody. I always do. Thank you. Related service providers, school psychologists. Wonderful. The whole point of today is bringing together a community. But I want to say, I know what day this is. I know that school ends in the next week. Public school. Recognize this is an incredibly busy time, and we are so honored you chose to spend some of those precious moments of this end of the school year with us. This is an incredibly challenging time in the field of education, particularly in the education of students with disabilities. We are seeing a regression away from inclusive education and a proliferation of segregated spaces for students with disabilities. There are not enough preschool programs and services and long wait lists for the limited number of spaces that are available. We are seeing a rise in mental health needs, related attendance concerns, and behavioral challenges, unprecedented teacher shortages, particularly related to disability, and hot reports of educator burnout and frustration and exhaustion. And all of this influenced by the long-lasting impacts of a pandemic that changed the way education happened for all of us, and probably for a long time to come. But as we think about these challenges, it is imperative that we face them with creativity, flexibility, and an openness to new ideas. That as we grapple with the issues and the shifting landscape and the new demands in front of us, that we don't revert to outdated ways of thinking, and we continue to center the voices and perspectives of the most marginalized students in our schools. We have to reassert our commitment to inclusive education and equitable opportunities for all learners, including those considered to have the most complex support needs and students that are multiply marginalized. And we need to presume competence and maintain high expectations for all students, from early intervention through pre-K to 12 on to higher education and the workforce. We need to prepare students for rich lives after high school and keep the widest range of options open. Syracuse University has a rich legacy of leadership and community integration and school and inclusive education. And we need to build on that history and keep moving forward. But enough from me. I want to turn your attention to more important voices than mine, those of the students, families, and educators from our local community that participated in our testimonial. I urge you to listen carefully to the testimonies they share as they will set the stage for the discussion we're going to have here this afternoon.
Hi, I am Chase Coleman. I enjoy working and doing schoolwork on the computer. I like to learn new skills and contribute on group projects. Sometimes it takes me a second to learn new skills. Oftentimes others get impatient with me, but I am a determined individual, and no matter how many times I mess up, I keep trying until I get it right. Sometimes teachers give up on me because I don't pick up the skill right away. But the ones that do take the time and effort to work with me, find out that I can learn these skills and I am fully capable.
Hi, I'm Clarice Coleman, and I'm the proud parent of a young man, Chase Coleman, who is on the autism spectrum. He's classified nonverbal. There were many moments where he should have been included, but he was excluded within an inclusive environment. There were many times that he wasn't given the opportunity to experience something such as music. When he was in elementary, I knew he couldn't go to music class, but I was preparing him by buying him different instruments at home and sending him to piano classes. And when he got to middle school, he was never offered that opportunity. And then when I asked in 8th grade what happened, why couldn't he be in the band? I was told, well, we didn't know he wanted to play an instrument. But no one ever asked. We have yearly meetings. No one ever asked us, does Chase want to play an instrument? Can Chase play an instrument? There were times in elementary where the physical therapist thought it was best to take him on a walk during the same time that the rest of the class was doing math. And he was losing 20 minutes of math each day. Well, I didn't ask them to teach him how to cross the street. And he didn't even have physical therapy on his IEP. Lo and behold, math was his favorite class. In 8th grade, his math teacher told me how much he loved math. And then in 12th grade, yes, it took till 12th grade, he actually passed the algebra regents. So why would he have been excluded from math back in the 4th grade? Why was it more important that he know how to cross the street? It takes a parent's tenacity to make sure that their child stays on course to have a fulfilling life. He's going to be one of the people that he votes. He's going to be one of the people that decide who gets into office. He's going to be one of the people that's going to pay taxes. He experienced in 9th grade where his special ed teacher wasn't even giving him the schoolwork that she was giving everyone else. And it took him nearly 3 months to get so frustrated that I had to ask one of his neurotypical friends, what's going on with Chase in this class? It turns out the teacher was never even giving him the chance. Too many of our kids are treated like they're not contributors to society, and they really are. Took from the beginning of middle school for him to get assessed to see if he could move from the Dynavox to an iPad with appropriate applications added to this iPad to help him express himself. And it's so sad that it's a fight to help him communicate. And that's all he wants to do, is to be able to communicate his wants, his needs to his instructors, to his friends, to his family, for himself. If all you're worried about is how much you have to spend to make this child successful, you take a moment and you decide wrongly well, this child is not worth all that money. We're going to invest it in this child. And we're supposed to be a community of caring. We're supposed to be preparing the next generation to run this world. And kids like Chase have a part.
This year, I think it was tough because it was difficult for me with the directions on the assignments. It is affected by my teaching assistant because he doesn't help me a bunch. I'd like my new teaching assistant to help me understand the assignments and help modify the assignments. When my teaching assistant puts my assignments into calendar, I'd like to see what page in my notebooks the assignment is on or where the work comes from so that I can do the work. I'd like to eat my food in the cafeteria because I don't see the friends that I see when I'm in class. I want to be in class with my friends, not a smaller class. I want my teachers to encourage me talking with my friends, and I want them to encourage friends to talk with me. I feel included in the most part. But many times people do not talk with me like at track team practice.
So my name is Jody Bernash, and I am currently a curriculum coordinator at Cayuga Onondaga BOCES. In my work right now, I provide on-site professional development, coaching, and mentorship services to various component districts, as well as support for district-wide and regional educational leadership. What I'm seeing right now is the impact of COVID on school culture. I think we've regressed. I think that schools are using self-contained classrooms as a way to combat learning gaps due to lack of tier 1 instruction. And I see kids getting classified as learning disabled when I'm not sure that it's not a factor of missed instruction as opposed to a specific learning disability. I think that our RTI and MTSS systems are underdeveloped, and I think that we are overclassifying and over-servicing kids. I also think that we have retreated into those safe spaces that we found during the pandemic, and schools that might have started making advances and pushing back against what we would call the older traditional views of special education have shifted their priorities to a world of survival. I think that we have to press pause and really look at our culture. And I think that we need to ask ourselves, what's our vision? What's our mission? And do we really believe in them, or are they just words? Do our everyday actions align with our visions? Because if we say all means all, are we removing barriers in order to make that happen? Because we know that equity begins with mindset, right? And I think it looks like starting with your leadership team, and that might be something as simple as taking a breath and stepping back and engaging in a book study or visiting model schools to see how other leadership teams are addressing antiquated or toxic cultures, and then making a real commitment to do the work. You know, I think that there needs to be a critical awareness on the typical structures and the administrative barriers to learning that school leaders actually can remove. And they start with asking those tough, reflective questions. How am I using staff to maximize access for all kids? What are our service delivery models? And are they driven by students' needs or by the confines of the master schedule? Do our special educators and general educators, and for that matter, ENL staff, have time to work together and plan together to ensure that kids get what they need in a least restrictive environment? Are we offering PD for staff on how to co-teach and collaborate and meet the needs of all kids in the gen ed setting as much as we possibly can? Curriculum. Is our curriculum accessible and flexible? Does it reflect the principles of equity and inclusion? And if not, how can we address that? And assessment. Our assessment systems, do they allow students to show their knowledge and skills on the same challenging content on different ways? And are we using formative assessment and feedback as much as we value high stakes testing? You know, I think that there's this bigger picture, and we have to step back and ask ourselves those hard questions. I mean, basically, are we servicing kids based on the, well, that's the way we've always done things around here mindset? Or can we actually deconstruct the old systems in favor of the kids that are in front of us right now? I mean, I've been a teacher practitioner for the majority of my career, and I, in my heart, believe that all teachers want what's best for kids, but they're tired and they're frustrated. And when they work in schools where special ed is seen as an extra or an add-on to their job, it just becomes this burden that feels impossible and it feels bad. And that changes teachers' attitudes. You know, we need to be in schools with systems that prioritize inclusion and that value the strength of all kids and that presume competence. Because when that's a priority, teachers feel it, right? They know that they work in a place where that holds value. Our idea of normal is based on everything we know up until a few years ago. We don't have normal now. So we're kind of lost. And the only way to address it is to just deconstruct the whole thing and take a step back and start from scratch, because the old ways do not align with the world that we live in now post-COVID.
I'm Tanya Chamberlain. And I am Maya Chamberlain. Maya just recently graduated from Inclusive U at Syracuse University. And we wanted to share with you a little bit about her educational experience from pre-K all the way up through to becoming a college graduate. Maya attended an inclusive pre-K where she began to learn some sign language, and she started out with a simple communication device and received services there. So one of the things we did to make sure that Maya was understood at school was we created the Maya book to show who she was, talk about her disability, what she's capable of doing, and to show kids that she's just a little girl just like they are. We were able to do that. We acquired a new communication device as soon as she entered kindergarten, and that was wonderful. And that's where she started to create sentences. And we had some learning hiccups with that also. It was pretty heavy to carry. Sometimes teachers would be very afraid because it was very expensive. So if she had a behavior outburst, they would take it away because they didn't want her to break it. But we had to explain that that's when she needs it the most so that she can use her words. We wanted to encourage her to use it. So those were some little hiccups we had. Each year in school, in elementary, we made a profile sheet for the teachers so that we could highlight Maya's strengths and what worked for her and what little tricks did not work for her. And we thought maybe that would save time each year as it passed on from teacher to teacher so that they could get right down to business and help with instruction. Often though, I felt that even though teachers were doing the best that they could, they had a classroom full of students that had a lot of needs. And so I felt like a lot of the instruction sometimes relied on Maya's one-on-one aide was responsible for a lot of her instruction or modifications. However, when she traveled to middle school, the teachers in that new building did not want to see the nice little profile sheet or the information in the Maya book or hear suggestions from Maya's 5th grade teachers. They wanted to start fresh and they didn't want any prior information to cloud their judgment. And then we found out the day before school that she was receiving a new one-on-one aide that did not know sign language. And middle school was very rough. You can come on back. Most of 6th grade and part of 7th grade, we had the fight or flight mode kicked in, and there was a lot of screaming and crying. And there were days that Maya didn't want to come to school at all. And teachers would talk in front of her and maybe they thought she couldn't hear them just because she was nonverbal, but she was hearing everything they said. So do you want to add something, Maya, about this? Do you want to add a little bit about some of the positives, or what was important to you in school? I was on you were on the track team, until senior year. Yeah. What was one of your best memories? UNT until I was in High school, I did not think I could go to college. Yeah. I wish they had known. Go ahead. Fair is not always being treated the same.
Many of our folks who shared in that testimonial actually here with us this afternoon. So I want to thank you all so much for your contributions to today's event and for your framing of the work we're going to now do together. So now we're going to provide an opportunity for our local legislators to respond, both to some of the opening comments, but more importantly, to what they heard in that testimonial and their sense of the issues related to education of students with disabilities. So I'm going to first ask Senator Rachel May to come to the podium.
Thank you, Christy, and thanks everyone for being here, especially the people who did these testimonials, because that was extremely powerful. I am not an expert in this. I'm mostly here to listen, but I will say a couple of things because I am the parent of a child who went through an inclusive program at Ed Smith School here in Syracuse, a school that was kind of the brainchild of Syracuse University education professors who really pioneered the idea of inclusive education at the elementary level. And I mean, I have one story about Sophie. She went off to first grade and the first week she was coming home in tears every day because there was a girl named Destiny who was pulling her hair every day. And I finally talked to her teacher at the end of the week, and the teacher said, well, Destiny is nonverbal, but I think she's trying to communicate that she wants Sophie to be her friend. And when we told Sophie that, everything changed. And actually the last day of school, Sophie came home in tears again because Destiny was not moving up into the same second grade class that she was going to be in. And I felt like I'm sure the teachers were doing amazing things to integrate Destiny into the class, but they were also teaching kids like my daughter how to be understanding and a friend, a true friend to people who had very different developmental experience than she had. And so the importance of inclusive education for the kids with disabilities is matched by its importance for everyone else as well. And so it saddens me what Christy led with, that inclusive education is on the decline, because it just feels like it's one of the most important things. I definitely felt with Sophie, like I could have taught her math and English and all kinds of the subject matter that she came home with, but I could never in a million years have taught her what she learned from the differently abled kids in her class. So just at that level, we need to support inclusive education, and clearly from these testimonies support the kind of flexibility and continuity that both the kids and the teachers need so badly. I also wanted to respond to the comment about not always just going with the way we have done things in the past, but trying to be to think clearly about how we can break down some of the barriers that we tend to take for granted in life. And I can just talk about a couple in my work, because one of the things we try to do as legislators is identify some of those barriers and break them down. And I have two that aren't specific to the education field, but Assemblyman Sturpey and I worked together with a man in the Fabius Pompey School District who is paraplegic, and he wanted to be a head coach. And he brought to us the issue that by state law, if you were going to be a head coach in a school, you had to be able to perform CPR, and he can't perform CPR. So we were able to introduce and pass a law that said, as long as there's someone present on staff who can perform CPR, then anybody who's qualified can become a head coach. And he is now a head coach of girls softball at Fabius Pompey. And it's pretty exciting to see, just barriers that you don't think of. And I had one other this year. I had an intern in my office who told me that he had originally wanted to be a police officer, but he has a minor color vision deficiency. And apparently one of the first things you do when you try to become a police officer is you have to take a color blindness test. And if you fail it, you cannot move forward with becoming a police officer. And he then did all the research and identified that there's a whole spectrum of color deficiency and at, the most acute level, yes, maybe that's disqualifying for being a police officer, but at all the other levels, it's not. And so he was able to write a piece of legislation to say they need to do more nuanced testing to only eliminate the people whose color vision deficiency might actually disqualify them from being a police officer. So it's just, there are so many barriers that we don't realize are out there that are kind of relics of some past idea or past inability to measure the differences that people have. So I feel like the kind of work that's being done with Inclusive U, that kind of work being done in our schools is so important. And anything you can do to educate us about what are those kinds of barriers that we can help to break down, we want to be there for you. So thanks everybody for being here, and I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you so much. And now we would like to invite Senator John Mannion to join us at the podium. Yeah.
Lots of familiar faces in the crowd. It's good to see everybody. And I have prepared remarks, and I'm not going to pull off the unprepared remarks probably as well as Senator May. She did a great job. But I do want to say a few things before I go into these. And, number one is we initially talked, as Mark had mentioned, about footprint here and where we are. So 2 Mannions came through the Gebby Clinic for testing, and I think we're pretty close to that location. I'm proud to be here. I'm certainly proud to be chair of the first ever, the standing committee on disabilities. I'm the only chair. We didn't have one before. So I come as a senator, but I also come as a teacher. I taught what makes it to the campaign materials is usually AP biology teacher, but I was a living environment teacher, and I was a 15-to-1 living environment teacher in a co-teach setting. And certainly some of my greatest rewards from teaching come from that. I'm also a parent. So and beyond that, I was a teacher representative, which means a teacher association leader. So I represented teachers, and I want to comment on the pandemic quickly, which is I want to say a big thank you to our paraprofessionals and our special education teachers. I represented the whole spectrum of teachers that were out there when the pandemic hit, and then we were shifted to remote learning. But I can tell you that the greatest impact that was left on me was from those paraprofessionals and from those special education teachers, because they knew that in that setting, they could not provide the services that they could every day to those kids that they work with, to provide them with that inclusiveness, with that appropriate accommodations that were necessary. And I got to talk to many of them because they wouldn't stop. And it really, in a very challenging time, even compromised their own health. And finally, I will say something as a parent to our parents out there. The word that was used from Chase's mom was tenacity. And you're not going to find many people in this world that are more tenacious than a parent of a child with disability. Because when they face that diagnosis and they're looking for help and professionalism, honestly, which is why we're here, it's very challenging. But they quickly learn that they constantly have to be tenacious, because they will see regression in their children. And the frustrating thing from a parent perspective with regression is that they know, as Maya's mom and Chase's mom said, they know
that regression can be avoided if professionalism and expertise and commitment and compassion are being utilized. So I thank us all for being here today. I should probably throw the booklet away, but I'm going to read it anyway. So, I thank Syracuse University for their pioneering work in inclusive education. We are fortunate here in Syracuse, New York, is that this is the place. We started it, and we should be proud of that. And the legacy lives on in many of the organizations that still exist here in Central New York. We are at the intersection here at Syracuse of inclusivity, higher education, and careers. As I said, I'm the first ever chairperson of the Senate Standing Committee on Disabilities, and I take that responsibility very seriously. The Senate has been a leader when it comes to giving New Yorkers with disabilities and their families and the workforce and the entire care industry the attention that it deserves. Not only a voice in state government, but also an ear that listens to the people who are calling out. I'm here to listen and learn so we can understand the challenges, identify solutions, and use the legislative process to improve the quality of life of all New Yorkers. Many people in this room have been with me at the tip of the spear in bringing disability rights and issues that impact our community to the forefront in Albany. And because of dedicated advocates that started this journey long before I was a parent, and certainly long before I was a state senator, we were able to save the CDPAP program, which many of you may be familiar with. There were going to be some changes to that where we're going to take our local providers out of the game. But we wanted to make sure those services stayed local, that the jobs stay here, and the people that know our community best were to be able to deliver those services. And we won that fight. Through hearings and roundtables, we have helped to build the momentum to increase pay for DSPs and other care industry professionals and service providers. We've heard over and over again the challenges that come in working with people with disabilities, especially in this challenging employment climate. Mandatory overtime, mandatory double shifts. That is a way that you will burn out the workforce that works with individuals in this care industry. And unfortunately, that is the case as we face these challenges. That's a way to destroy supports for people with disabilities. And it's really, really very discouraging, but we will be tenacious in our fight to make sure that those people get the respect that they deserve. We've also brought heightened accountability and transparency to OPWDD. I work in partnership with Kimberly Hill here, Chief Disability Officer, first ever, and she is a huge champion for this community, and I continue to look forward to partnering with her and making sure that we shine a spotlight on issues for people with disabilities. I'm deeply involved also in policy areas where we need to do more and we need to do better. One of those is housing. As I mentioned, better pay for the workforce, equity in school funding, and all of those areas are important. We also need to connect more employers to job candidates with disabilities. The unemployment rate for individuals with disabilities is way too high, upwards of 70%. And I've advanced legislation and had it signed into law that is a move in the right direction as far as access and opportunities. We've heard some of that today about, the challenges and the successes. And I'm hopeful that, we continue to move in the right direction, and the insinuation that we're moving in the wrong direction just has to be stopped. Some of the successes we've had is not the insinuation, mind you, the fact that we can't allow that to happen. And unfortunately, when budgets are tight and staffing is short, that there's a regression to those things, and that's what we have to stop. I fortunately have gotten a lot of legislation over the line, and a lot of that legislation is targeted towards the disabilities community. A few things that I focused on. I have legislation awaiting the signature of the governor that will create an ombudsman program for OPWDD. And there's $2 million there as well to fund it. I've also passed bills requiring more training for CPS workers when it comes to working with students and children with disabilities, requiring all agencies to make sure that their websites are fully accessible, reforming a state employment program to include both full-time and part-time opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Those are all passed and waiting to become law. And I, of course, encourage the governor to sign those bills into law. I'm also carrying bills right now to establish a hotline number as a one-stop resource where people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can access services. I'm carrying a bill that would require OPWDD to provide housing navigation services so we can make sure that we are connecting people to appropriate and innovative housing situations. Something I view at least is something we can do for our direct support professionals in our workforce is a $4,000 wage enhancement bill. We did not get that into the budget, but we will continue to fight to try to advance that initiative in hopes that we can support that workforce. This country has come a long way since 50 years ago in Willowbrook and 30 years plus since the signing of the ADA. It's the people in this room that are going to keep us moving forward in the tradition of those two landmark events and the landmark events that have occurred right here at Syracuse University. I'll be fighting along with you. I thank you for participating today in this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
And finally, we'd like to welcome Assemblyman Al Sturpey to offer his remarks.
Hi there. I didn't know much about the disability community a number of years ago. And then I married one of those mothers who advocates very strongly and was plunged into a different world, having to struggle, with schools to allow your kid in and, provide whatever inclusivity back then that they tried to use, and just gained an awful lot of respect for parents. I joined a group called Family Capped that, was really started by a bunch of mothers who all had kids with disabilities, and they would just go have coffee and start talking about what services did you get? How'd you get them? And they'd go back and forth. And I played football at Notre Dame, so I know a lot of different kinds of language that people use. But when you're in a room with mothers whose kids have disabilities and they're not getting what they want, you hear some words you've never heard before. So, it is a different world and it's getting a little bit better, but we still have a long ways to go. As far as things we've done, I think the most important thing we've tried to do anyway, we haven't succeeded yet, was to get some of the schools in. The one I'm most associated with is Main Street School in North Syracuse. It's a 4410 school. I think it's one of the only public 4410 schools in central New York because all the rest of them have closed. And that's because of a funding issue and the way they are funded. But we've been trying in the legislature to get the formulas they use thrown out and get the increases that the regular public schools get to be attached to the 4410s and the 853s and all these other, special schools. And if we could do that, at least we'd know that there's going to be increases all the time, as opposed to what happened during a previous administration where they didn't get any increases, I think, for about 7 years, which caused, lots of services to sort of go by the wayside. The things that are important are things like Main Street School, where they have comprehensive and intensive services that are all delivered in the same place. And as opposed to itinerant services that are maybe when the kids that are babysitters or something, someone comes over and does it. I mean, it's just a lot more powerful if you can do it in the setting of the 4410. So, you know, one of the other things that I've done, I hope I've done anyway, knowing about Syracuse's Inclusive U and meeting with the folks, Beth Myers, and, you know, I had a meeting with Chancellor John King from SUNY. And, you know, he talked about some things, and we're trying to do more for kids with disabilities. I said, well, if you want to really know how to do that, I said, I think I could hook you up with the folks at Inclusive U at Syracuse. And he said, really? So I did. I talked to Beth. She got in touch with him. He's texted me about 5 times since then to thank me for it and all that. And of course, then we had a meeting with the Chancellor of CUNY. And one of the people asked questions about what they did for kids with disabilities. And he says, well, not enough, really. And I said, well, if you really want to know. And so I gave out Beth's information. I got his information, and I think they've hooked up too. So the only reason I do that is that those are institutions that are so big that they can really improve the world for lots of kids with one big swipe if they can implement this stuff throughout those systems. So, you know, I know that they'll do the best. We got a little bit of an increase this year for college supports, not nearly as much as we needed, but you know, we're the kind of people that just keep going back. We keep trying, we're never stop. And hopefully in the years to come, we'll have enough funding for both college kids and all the kids from early intervention on. And early intervention is another area that needs a lot of help right now. The, you know, funding for that and the amount of money they get paid for things here in Onondaga County is not the greatest. And since the pandemic, when they can do remote teaching and still get paid, a lot of providers will teach places outside of Onondaga County, you know, because the rate they're going to get is a higher rate. So we have to work a little bit on that, try to straighten that situation out. But there's not really a lot more that I can say about this other than we are here as legislators, like John said, and we are available anytime anybody wants to talk to us about issues they're having. And we'll do our best to make whatever changes need to be made. So thanks everybody for being here, and I hope to learn a lot more. Thank you.
I really want to thank Senators May and Mannion and Assemblyman Sturpey for taking time to be with us today and listening. And this is really what today's about, is airing ideas, sharing with each other the challenges, but also talking about creative solutions. So now we would like to move to our panelists who have been patiently waiting over there. So I'm going to ask them to start making their way while I read the introductions. We are really excited by the folks that agreed to be part of this panel discussion today. Joining us are Kimberly Hill Ridley, who was appointed governor by Kathy Hochul to serve as New York State's first ever Chief Disability Officer last year. Prior to joining the executive chamber, Kim served as the principal analyst for the New York State Assembly Standing Committee on People with Disabilities. She's also an alumni of Syracuse. We're going to claim that. Sorry, and Utica, but we'll claim the Syracuse. Christopher Suriano has overseen the New York State Office of Special Education since 2016 and has devoted his career to the field of special education and working with students with disabilities. Prior to this role, he was executive director of specialized services in the Rochester City School District and has worked in the Special Education Quality Assurance Western Regional Office. Iristina Reed is the Special Education Director for the Syracuse City School District, which serves over 18,000 pupils, including approximately 3,800 students with disabilities. She has served in this role since 2021, and prior to that, she was the Assistant Director of Special Ed. Lori Saley has served as the Executive Director of Juonio since 2018. Previously, she was the Assistant Director from 2009. Saley began her career at Juonio as a student teacher in 1987 and has also worked as a special education teacher at Mott Road Elementary. She also holds degrees in special education from Syracuse University, and she's the Vice President of the CNY Coalition for Young Children with Special Needs. And finally, Beth Myers is the Lawrence B. Tayshoff Associate Professor of Inclusive Education and the Executive Director of the Tayshoff Center for Inclusive Higher Ed and the Assistant Director for the Center on Disability and Inclusion. She's a faculty member here in the School of Education, teaching in the Inclusive Elementary program. She oversees Inclusive U, the largest, most inclusive college program for students with intellectual disability in the country. And she co-runs the New York State Inclusive Higher Education Coalition. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here, and I'm going to go join them in the comfy seats. So I want to start by thanking you all for being here. You have gotten a chance to hear testimonies, you've got a chance to hear remarks from local legislators, and now I want us to talk forward thinking. How do we improve some of the challenges that we are facing? So Kim, I'm going to start with you. How do we ensure in all of this work that disabled people, disabled perspectives, and disabled voices are centered in these discussions?
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for having me. Can you all hear me?
Yep. Yeah,
Thank you. Is that any better? Okay. So thanks for having me. And I love that question because in our office, the first thing that you see when you walk in is a sign that says nothing about us without us. I think that including people with disabilities, their families, their friends is a critical piece of making disability policy, that decisions shouldn't be made without talking to people that are living it. I think that's part of why Governor Hochul both created the office that I am in charge of, hired me, and then I have since hired individuals with disabilities within my office. So I think without getting the experiences and hearing about the desires of the disability community, it doesn't really make sense to move forward on policy.
Thank you. I really, that idea of starting with disabled perspectives first is really been central to the work at Syracuse University and central to the work in the advancing of inclusive education. Central New York has long been a leader in inclusive ed. We were at the forefront of the deinstitutionalization movement and the school inclusion movement. However, schools in the area are less inclusive than they were 10 years ago. What do you attribute this to, and how might we reverse this trend? Chris, I'm going to send this to you first, and then I'm going to send it to Iristina.
I'll start with, let's take a look at what the data says. And the data says as a state, for school age students, about 58% of school age students are educated 80% of them at a time in general education. And that number is nowhere near where we need to be, but still it stays kind of stable, the trend over the last 10, 15 years. Where we're seeing an issue is at the preschool level. And this goes back to the availability of programming from the very early ages due to fiscal viability of programs. So we're seeing, I have the pleasure of signing the letters that are approval letters for preschool programs and school age programs across the state. And we're seeing a significant uptick in the number of closure letters that we're signing. So we're very happy that in the enacted budget this year, we do have the funding to start the rate tuition methodology reform that's been so needed for so many years. We've been advocating for that, and we have those funds now to start that process. So future state we'll have programs that are fiscally viable and able to stay open. But for looking at increasing and ensuring that we have inclusive environments for students with disabilities, the department, the New York State Education Department, our priority is our policy is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And how is it that we ensure that students with disabilities have access to those inclusive programming? So we are looking very closely at our preschool inclusion initiative, which looks at how do we increase access for students with disabilities, preschool students with disabilities early on to have access to inclusive preschool programming. How we'll do that is eventually through the funding methodology, we'll have more inclusive preschool programs being able to stay open. Right now, the trend is those programs are closing as more and more of the non-disabled peers of those students are attending the UPK programs that are being offered by their districts, which we are working to increase the access to those programs for students with disabilities. And that, there are funding barriers, there are space issues, that all those things that we have to overcome, but we are really focusing hard on how is it that we ensure that all really is for all, and that preschool students with disabilities have that equitable access to the programs that their non-disabled peers are able to access. So looking at the preschool level and ensuring that we are able to start the trend back towards inclusionary practices and inclusionary opportunities.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks for giving a sort of statewide look at this. Iristina, can you bring it closer to home? What do we need to do in Central New York to ensure that we are moving in the direction of greater access to inclusive education?
Yeah, so I think certainly what Chris says is it starts foundationally with our youngest learners, and seeing the impact of not having service providers and children not receiving services as early as 3 years old is certainly widening the gap for our students as they enter into kindergarten. And coupled with that are now the new standards and curriculum. We can't talk about needs without talking about changes that we've made in curriculum. And so when children enter it, that we're starting right away with this gap deficit that we're trying to close, and which leads to our teacher shortage, right? And so we're facing one of the largest national shortages that we've ever faced before, particularly in the area of special education, which leads us to have many vacancies, and we're filling those vacancies with uncertified teachers, so they don't have the expertise to be able to help bridge this gap that they're already coming and we're faced with. And so when you couple that, and then you throw in a pandemic, and then you throw in the rise in our mental health needs that our students are facing, when we have those factors starting to work together, we see that we have a solution that people want to go to, which is exclusionary practices. And what we really need to do is we need to, first of all, get services for our earliest learners. It's particularly children with disabilities. We need to ensure that we are partnering with local colleges in terms of training and preparation, making the field of education more attractive again, so that we get people like me who knew in 8th grade that I wanted to be a teacher, and particularly a teacher for students with disabilities. And then we need to work and transform our climate and cultures to be trauma informed, so that we start to engage, and not that we're trained mental health providers or are able to provide that therapy, but that we create environments where children who have experienced trauma or who haven't experienced trauma begin to benefit from that type of environment. And when we do that as a whole school, as a whole district, then certainly we begin to move back into including all of our children.
Thank you so much for that, Aristina. Lori, we're going to keep going with the preschool issue just for a moment, since this has been brought up by multiple people. We know there aren't enough programs. We know that there are long waiting lists. And we're starting to see that as students are transitioning out of programs, they're going into kindergarten, into spaces that aren't necessarily as receptive to inclusion. What needs to happen for us to increase access for young children to general education spaces?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach. So, people have referenced the changing the funding streams, that absolutely is required, so that we can provide staff and so that programs can stay open. We had many preschool programs in this area that were, sort of living on the edge fiscally prior to COVID, that didn't make it through COVID and have closed their doors. And so we've got to find ways to provide a funding mechanism that both covers the costs and a rate setting process and reconciliation process that is way more efficient than the 2 years it now takes to receive reimbursement for expended funds, because preschool programs can't afford to carry it. And so that's why they're closing their doors. So that's a piece of the puzzle. We've got to address the national teacher shortage by, as Aristina said, changing the rhetoric about that so that we can attract people in. We need to have incentives, student loan forgiveness programs, things like that, because not only are there not enough certified people currently in the field, there's nowhere near enough people in the pipeline. So we're looking at a long-term shortage if we don't address these issues. So that's a piece. And then I think the other part of the answer really is removing some of the barriers and getting creative about collaborative kinds of models for programming. So for instance, we collaborate with the Syracuse City School District to provide universal pre-K program to students at Jawonio. So our students without disabilities aren't leaving us to go to other programs. They're coming to Jawonio for the inclusion and the quality program that we provide, but also getting the support of universal pre-K services to do so. I will say that that's complicated because the regulations are not aligned. So a universal pre-K program has to be a minimum of 6 hours a day for a full day program. State ed rate reimbursement for a special ed program for kids receiving special ed programs, the maximum they'll pay for a full day is 5. So there are barriers built into the ways that regulations are set that have to be addressed to allow us to do the kinds of creative collaborations that are really going to address the really complex and wide range needs that we're seeing. And in addition to UPK and special ed collaborations, as you mentioned, Iristina, definitely we need to be thinking creatively and collaborating in terms of mental health needs and more trauma-informed responses. So.
Thanks, Laura. So we've been talking about preschool a lot, but we're sitting here at Syracuse University, and we have lots of folks in the room that do work at the college level. So Beth, I want to turn to you for a moment. If we want to start with the assumption that all students should see college as an option, what do we need to do in the early grades to ensure that it remains an option?
Thank you so much. You know, I really, it's such an important topic to talk about because I think we saw in the video, Maya talk about it. And Maya, thank you so much for sharing that testimony, because I already knew your story and it still crushes me to hear it. But there's something about that story that we just hear all the time from so many of our students that come here to the Inclusive U program, and over and over again, they say, I didn't think that I could come to college. I never knew that I could go to college. Or people specifically told me that I wouldn't go to college like my siblings, or that college wasn't for me. And what does that mean for what we're teaching kids about what our expectations are for them? And really thinking about the way that we envision a future for our students, particularly our students with significant disabilities. So thinking about how we position kids to have high expectations for them in school. Maya didn't really know until she was in high school that this is something that was possible for her. But we need to start thinking about transition supports long before then, envisioning college as an opportunity for kids in middle school, in elementary school, in preschool, and really showing that this is a possibility to kids and families and teachers who don't even have this as a vision. But that also means increasing transition supports, starting transition supports a lot earlier than we do, envisioning transition supports in a really different way, and also expanding college opportunities to students with significant disabilities across the state.
Thanks. Several people have commented already on the critical teacher shortage, the pipeline problem, shortage of paraprofessionals. How do we address this shortage and still maintaining high standards for educator preparation and enticing people into the field. Iristina already commented, changing the rhetoric is really important about what it means to be an educator. What other ideas do folks on the panel have for how we address the teacher shortage in ways that still lead to the kinds of educators that we really want and the supports that they need to be successful?
So specifically in Syracuse City, we are trying to think creatively and out of the box. And so we have started a few different partnerships with colleges. So we have an NYU residency program where we partner and actually have, so these are individuals who have a 4-year or a master's in a different area, not education. And we partner with them in terms of the cost of tuition. And in return, they come and teach essentially student teach in our district for an entire year. We have placed them in our highest area of need, so our middle school and high school. And each year that's yielded us anywhere from 6 to 10 teachers that are committed to coming back, specifically working in special education. The next layer that we need to add on is a dual certification, because we're lacking in terms of being able to teach at the high school level. And so we need to add on a content area to that. So NYU has been pretty successful in the district. So we've now partnered with Lemoyne College. So I think starting to think about how do we, attract first, but then how do we have partnerships with local colleges at reduced cost so that potentials candidates are not faced with some of the financial challenges of higher education.
Yep, and I just want to add that, I won't speak for the Office of Higher Education in the department, but I did work closely with them, and we need to look at the various certification requirements and structures that are in place. And I'll speak quickly to one that many of you probably in the audience understand. The special education certification requirements and process was so complicated in New York State that, it really was creating a barrier to people wanting to go into that field and get that particular certification. So, we worked for years to develop and, is now shifting from those various grade band certifications that we used to have in that very complex process to an all grade certificate in New York State, which spans preschool through grade 12. You become certified in looking at the secondary level, that need for that content area. So it's very streamlined way through the extension to that all grade certificate to become certified in a content or more very easily. And to ensure that when you come out of college, we have special education teachers that can be placed where there is needs in their districts, as well as possibly have that content or two that they can also teach in those special classes that are really looking at that credit bearing content courses, which I know districts across the state really struggle to find those teachers. So really looking at what are the barriers we can remove through certification structures. And I know our Office of Higher Education is really taking a hard look at that. And you're beginning to see those new ways of those new types of certifications coming out. But especially at all grades one was I think a huge step in the right direction for New York.
I would just add to that, to what you were saying, Iristina, about partnerships. I think those creative partnerships where programs and districts can provide some funding support for people to get to go to school, but also really positive, strong opportunities for hands-on learning is important. And that means looking at not just what are those programs, but how do we structure them so that students enrolled in them can be working and going to college and working towards certification at the same time. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is financially, most people can't afford to do it otherwise. But the other is because you really gain, and this was my experience when I went through SU as a student, you gain a really different level of knowledge when you're working and living it every day while you're also taking courses. So we need to get creative about the scheduling and the requirements in ways that allow people to do that.
Can I quickly add something?
Sure.
I think it's critically important that we talk about the relationship between, the the secondary school system, or what we want to see teachers coming out of college with, and then working very closely as a state education department with institutions of higher education to ensure those preparatory programs are, graduating special education teachers that are versed in multi-tiered systems of support, are understanding of how to, what does it mean to have a high quality inclusive classroom, graduating general education teachers into the pipeline that understand special education, understand those same things around inclusive settings. So ensuring that the preparatory programs that are getting these teachers certified is, working hand in hand on what are the priorities that we need to see for change in the field, which is clearly here today talking about increasing access to inclusive settings.
Thank you. I have lots more questions, but I'm going to hold them for now because I want to make sure we get a chance to, if there are folks here in the audience, some of the questions that I've asked came in via email, but I know that there are people here in the audience who may have questions as well. I would ask, though, that you don't give lengthy testimonials. We want to have an opportunity for as many questions as possible. So if you have a question you would like to ask the panel, you may raise your hand. You may come here to these mics. And if you would prefer to have a mic brought to you, there are folks that can do that. Do you have anyone who would like to pose a question?
And I'll take any easy questions.
I'm not sure if my question is, I don't really need a mic, is more for our elected officials or professionals, but when can I love what you're saying about pre-K, early intervention, all the way to middle school. And then in our system, our school system, our kids fall into Area 51. And then everything goes down in middle school, and then it's less in high school. And then this is the only program out here for them, for my 21-year-old son, for Maya. And then you're looking at funding. So when can parents of young adults expect our governor to sign a bill into law to allow students with developmental disabilities to receive TAP funds so that they can pay Syracuse University, Lemoyne, OCC, or any other university or college, especially since we are the parents who contribute through our state taxes. And when he goes to the store and he pays state taxes, but we don't have that option. And without that option, that's less opportunities for him to do what he needs to do to be a contributing member of the society.
I did not feed her this question.
Are you sure?
She is not a plant. Thank you. I appreciate that question. Does anybody want to
Take it up?
answer it?
Well, I think maybe I can start.
You can start. Great.
I can start, and I think I need to defer to Senator Mannion a little bit. Is this a bill that is coming to the governor? I've seen versions of this bill.
So what I would say is we were hopeful that this legislation would get into the budget, which is when anything that has a fiscal to it is necessary. The word I would share with you and
I'm sorry, Senator, can you use the mic?
yes,
Thank
I'm
you.
sorry.
That
I
helps
do
our,
apologize. Yes. So thank you. And I apologize, everybody. But I will say that typically something with a fiscal implication like that would happen in the budget process. And for me, as a parent and as disabilities chair, like the only word I can say that Beth, you and I should land on, and others, and Kim and others, would be outrage. It has to happen. Like it, and of course, there is, if I have a child with an IEP and they're eligible for TAP, they can. That's their, but that is I'm going to use the phrase, your average run-of-the-mill typical student. And the fact that we don't make sure that this is expansive to meet the needs of kids that are going to be in a more flexible, more unique setting just should not be the case. So honestly, we live to fight another day. because a standalone bill to make sure that this happens is really not going to happen outside of the budget. It has to happen in the budget process. So like so many have done such a great job, the advocacy has to start before the calendar year starts. So like in November and December is when you want to get into your legislators' email boxes and offices and phone lines and say that if students are going to be able to access TAP as a student with a disability, it has to happen. And this has to happen in the budget. It has to happen now. The governor leads with her budget and then we follow. So I encourage all of you to contact, honestly, not just the disability chair of the Senate and the Assembly, but contact all of your representative officials. If you can spread that word throughout the state, they really need to communicate to your individual Assembly people and senators, because if they don't hear it from you, they're relying on people like Assemblyman Sturpey and myself and Assemblywoman Seawright. I'm giving too long of an answer, but it hurts, because when we expand TAP eligibility and we don't expand it to this population, it doesn't make any sense. It's illogical. So I appreciate the question, and I encourage everybody to reach out to your elected officials across the state as we approach next year's budget year. And the governor leads in January, and I hope that it leads with this change in the legislative piece that includes the fiscal.
And I'd like to
Thank you.
just go a step further. As far as my office is concerned, we're probably starting state of the state and budget preparations anytime. Yeah. Any day. I expect that our office will start pitching ideas for next year's state of the state for the governor that leads into a lot of what is her budget. So I highly recommend the advocacy to start as soon as possible. And afterwards, if you want to meet up, I can give you my card. We can set up a meeting to discuss it. You're welcome.
And my office as well is, we always want to hear from the stakeholders in the field about the needs of the students with disabilities and the young adults with disabilities. And so again, reaching out to the Office of Special Education is always another avenue to really voice the need that if the field is feeling.
Thank you. You have a question back here?
Hi, my name is Kawanka Ellerby. I am here with Blueprint 15. I am a navigator. I just want to piggyback off of what she said. I sit on the board for Syracuse Housing Authority for kids to get scholarships. A lot of them don't be able to get the scholarships because their grades, their reading, their comprehension. We really got to work on something harder than that, because we're losing that. Like she said, Aristina said, once they get from middle school and they go to high school, there's that big gap, and we can't wonder why we can't fill, seats for scholarships and things like that. And I'm noticing that the 504s are being into play, but they're not. Also, me working for the city school district, you see a big gap in between of children with disability and children are not. Me also having a child with a 504 was reading dyslexia. I hope y'all do get that legislated in hand so I could send my child back to college. She went to Lemoyne. But just seeing that, just having a child with a disability of my own, seeing the big gap and the struggle of her focusing, reading, comprehending, and trying to go. She was an excellent student. She had good grades, but she struggled into things that she couldn't comprehend. Like reading was okay, but math, she struggled. We got now that the math, how it is now, it's so hard. We're barely getting kids to pass Common Core math. It's so hard that kids is barely passing by the skin of their teeth. We're putting them through summer school, but they're not even getting past a 55. When she went to summer school, only out of 72% of the class failed. And me as her parent, knowing that she was in the Upper Brown program with Ms. Harmersh and Mr. Kenneth Black, I ended up sending her there with them. She ended up passing with a 65. So it was things that I had to learn to as her parent to what helps her to cope with that because that was one of her struggles. So me as a parent with 2 children that had disability problem, we really got to get it because we lose them right after middle school. It seems like we in sabbatical and we have to go to these special education class, meetings and talking to the teacher and things like that. And we really have to have teachers that want to be into special education because it takes a lot of patience and it takes a lot of, helping, not just also the child, but the parent too. Because if you see the child have it, the parent have it also. So how can we help that gap with both? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges, particularly in upper grades, and what are some ideas of ways to support that and to involve parents. Anybody want to take that up?
I just want to point out, if you don't know, the state education department does have a blue ribbon commission looking at the current graduation measures in New York State and looking in the very near future to be making a recommendation to the Board of Regents of what does it mean to have what does it mean to have a New York State diploma, and what does that diploma reflect, and how may we change the requirements that are currently in place, to something different. And voices and stories like yours about, and the struggles we hear that students with disabilities experience at that secondary level. I know personally, we have a very complex system of safety nets that, are in place to level the playing field when it comes to students with disabilities being able to earn a regular a Regents or a local diploma. And what will be the future state of the graduation measures in New York State is something we're taking a look at. So there's more to come on that, but that's an exciting opportunity right now that the department is currently engaged in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very loaded question because I think there's a variety of different factors that contribute to why we are seeing an increased gap, right? And particularly what happens when our children go from middle school to high school. And so I'll just respond in this way. I think it is really important when children are K-5, right? Those are foundational years where we're teaching those new skills and they're building upon each other, right? And I give the analogy of reading. This is where they're learning to read. And then it makes a shift right around 3rd, 4th grade where they're reading to learn, right? And this is where students with disabilities, where I try to help and support families, is now this is the use of this IEP and the 504. And it's not just about programming, but what are those program modifications, accommodations, assistive tech? How do we level that playing field and ensure that these things are put in place to follow? So even if I'm struggling in reading at a 4th grade level, right? I'm in 8th grade ELA class, this is where we need the use of assistive tech, right? Where the child now gets that text read to them. So the focus becomes about accessing the gen ed curriculum and being able to engage in it and not a focus on actually learning to read the content. And sometimes that's the misunderstanding we have. It's not about lowering the expectations or the rigor for that student. I heard some of the testimonials in the video where children weren't given the work, or because they're nonverbal, they couldn't figure out how to get a response to know what the child actually knows or don't know, right? And so it just naturally, we're looking for an oral or written response from a child, and knowing how to truly engage and know the disability to be able to truly access what the child can and is able to do and bring to the table each and every day. And so I try to strongly advocate and support families and being able to understand what tools, what advances do we have to level that playing field so that they continue to get the grade level content, but be able to demonstrate their knowledge maybe in a different way.
Thank you. And we have a question over here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Maddie LaCastro, and I'm a medical student at Upstate. And I also work alongside my good friend Helena at the Golisano Center for Special Needs. And I work alongside families throughout the process to get durable medical equipment and assistive technology. So I know that was just mentioned. I want to bring that up. I see how much families struggle through this process. It's a battle with insurance companies. A child with cerebral palsy, for example, may take over a year for them to get a wheelchair that is suitable for them. And so I just wanted to bring this up and see if this is a priority for OPWDD to streamline this process and make it easier for families to get the assistive technology that they need.
Thank you.
I think it needs to go a bit further. It certainly is a priority. It's something that we're looking at, but not just through OPWDD, but through all of the different agencies that provide durable medical equipment. Waiting a year for something that levels a playing field is way too long. So yeah, it's certainly something that we're definitely looking at and hoping to condense that time dramatically.
Thank you.
And I think we have time for just one more question before we close.
Hi, my name is Laura McBride.
Hi,
I
my
was
name
one
is
of
Laura
the
McBride.
students that used to be here. I graduated with a master's
I graduated with a master's from SU
in 1999.
in 1999.
I wanted to say right now,
I want
I'm
to say
still
right now,
facing
I'm still
discrimination
facing
and violation
discrimination
because
ADA
of their lack of
violations.
understanding.
Because of people's
They
lack
don't
of
even
understanding.
listen like they should.
They don't want to listen like they should.
I've been on a runaround. So what can we do about that?
I've been on a runaround. What can we do?
I should be
to
enjoying
change
a
that?
career,
I should be able to enjoy a career.
and I'm good at it.
I'm good
I've
at
been
what
an
I do.
advocate,
I've been
but
an
an
advocate,
unpaid advocate, self-advocate.
but I've been an unpaid
Where are
advocate.
you guys?
Where are you guys?
So here I am.
Here I am. Speaking
I'm
answers.
not going away because
not
I
gonna go
have
away.
rights and I have the right to be heard.
I have the right
But
to
I
be
do
heard.
have a solution. It's
I have a
called
solution.
understanding
It's called
and
understanding and
each
respecting
person,
each
what they can
individual
do.
with what they can do.
And it's gonna be successful.
That will be
Very
successful.
simple.
It's quite simple.
No more excuses.
No more excuses.
Just get along.
Just get along.
I really went through
I went
too
through
much.
too much.
Too much. I shouldn't even be
I
going through
shouldn't
that.
even be going through that.
I thought when I got my master's, yay,
I
maybe
thought when
the
I got my
filing
master's, I'd made it.
include me.
Maybe I would finally be included.
Thank you.
Didn't happen. Not happening.
Thank you so much. That's actually a really powerful comment for us to end on. I want to say the success of disabled students, disabled community members, disabled employees, this is not a special education issue. This is not a general education issue alone. It is a community issue. The point of today's event was to bring together people representing a whole variety of perspectives in the field of education, to think about creative solutions and just to listen to each other. This is not the end of the conversation. Disabled people are not going anywhere. Disability is the one minority group we all will have the privilege of joining if we live long enough. And we need to think about supports that provide people dignity, respect, education, and opportunity. I want to thank our panelists for being here. I want to thank our legislators for being here. I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to encourage you to reach out to us at the Center on Disability Inclusion, but also several people here have offered to be a sounding board for your concerns and your ideas. And I encourage you to reach out to share what you feel needs to be done differently and bring your creativity and your ideas forward. As we bring today's event to a close, I encourage you to please stay and join us for a reception in the lobby and keep this conversation going. So I want to thank you all so very much for joining us and for sharing in this commitment to increasing access and opportunity and meaningful education for all disabled students. Thank you very much.